Every time Western capitals talk about confronting Beijing, they omit a single brutal metric. Economic severance is not a policy. It is a calculated cardiac arrest. You cannot detach a continent-sized industrial engine without detonating your own domestic economy. The mainstream media frames this as a simple ideological duel. Choose confrontation to protect your security, or choose management to protect your wallet. But that narrative treats global manufacturing like a modular plug. For 30 years, corporate boardrooms optimized every single margin by outsourcing the entire physical foundation of the West into a single jurisdiction. This was never a partnership born of shared trust. It is an architectural trap built on absolute efficiency. Centralizing production in China solved short-term capital returns, but it locked global superpowers into a dependency so deep that autonomy has become an unaffordable luxury. Imagine running a life support system that you fundamentally despise. Yet pulling the plug means flatlining before your rival does. That is the exact dilemma paralyzing modern statecraft. Nations are held in check, not by direct coercion, but by an economic infrastructure where self-defense equates to self-sabotage. Once you view global politics through the lens of a closed, interdependent machine, political hesitation stops looking like weakness. It reveals itself as a terrified awareness that the entire apparatus is buckling under its own weight. But if the cost of managing this relationship scales infinitely every single year, what happens when the price of staying inside the machine finally eclipses the price of breaking it? To understand why political mandates fail, you have to look past the customs ports and examine the industrial clusters. For 3 decades, Western nations didn't just outsource assembly, they outsourced entire ecosystems. A single advanced circuit board relies on dozens of specialized chemical precursors, rare earth processing nodes, and component suppliers that exist almost exclusively within a compressed geographic radius. You cannot duplicate 30 years of hyper-specialized manufacturing infrastructure with a simple executive order. This creates a profound structural contradiction for corporate boardrooms in London, New York, and Sydney. Publicly, executives bow to political pressure, pledging compliance with diversification. Privately, their supply chain ledgers tell a starkly different story. Alternative hubs lack the skilled workforce, the integrated logistics, and the sheer processing capacity to scale. Attempting to bypass this system overnight doesn't achieve independence. It achieves financial collapse. The irony of modern globalization is that efficiency demands concentration. When you optimize a global economy for absolute profit margins, you systematically eliminate redundancy. Every backup plan, every secondary supplier that was cut to save a fraction of a percent on the balance sheet was a brick removed from the safety wall. Now, nations are staring at the wreckage of their own efficiency models, trapped by the very systems they engineered to win the global market. Central banks and treasury departments quietly model these realities behind closed doors. They know that forcing a hard break without a 10-year structural cushion would trigger catastrophic inflation spikes, corporate insolvencies, and supply chain blackouts across Western markets. The leadership is caught in a high-stakes standoff against their own economic reality. The penalty for staying is systemic vulnerability, but the penalty for leaving is immediate domestic shock. This is why geopolitical posturing remains largely theatrical. While politicians trade insults and draft punitive trade bills, the financial plumbing continues to pump capital and materials through the exact same channels, bound by a relentless mathematical gravity that ideology cannot rewrite. But if the physical plumbing of the global economy cannot be severed without self-destruction, what happens when a localized friction point triggers a cascading failure across the entire network?
This is the ultimate systemic paradox. The very mechanism designed to maximize stability is now the primary source of global fragility. When you strip away every backup supply line and every redundant domestic foundry to save a fraction of a percent on a spreadsheet, you haven't built a resilient empire. You've built a house of cards that collapses the moment a single card is pulled. Mainstream analysts look at this fragility and demand immediate decoupling, as if resilience can be purchased overnight with tariffs and protectionist speeches. But true industrial capacity cannot be legislated into existence. You cannot vote a skilled workforce into a vacant warehouse, nor can you pass a bill to instantly replicate decades of chemical engineering expertise.
This creates a terrifying margin for error, because both superpowers are locked into the same economic circulatory system. A localized shock, whether a maritime bottleneck, a raw material export restriction, or a sudden financial squeeze, no longer stays local. It translates instantly into systemic paralysis across Western markets, catching central banks completely off guard. Leaders are trapped in a high-stakes game of chicken with their own economic survival. They know that maintaining the status quo deepens their structural vulnerability every single year. Yet, any abrupt attempt to steer away from the cliff threatens to snap the steering column entirely. They aren't managing a rivalry. They are managing the slow-motion decay of an unbendable system. When an architecture refuses to bend, it doesn't adapt, it shatters. The longer Western capitals pretend they can wield total economic control over a system they structurally outsourced, the closer they push the global market toward a catastrophic, non-linear break. But if the central architecture of global capitalism is past the point of reform, what strategic maneuvers are major powers quietly deploying behind closed doors to survive the inevitable fallout?
Behind the closed doors of central banks and corporate boardrooms, the true operational reality is entirely divorced from public political theater. According to internal trade and supply chain metrics from bodies like the OECD and Chambers of Commerce, over 80% of multinational corporations publicly pledge diversification, while quietly deepening their capital footprint in the exact same industrial clusters. They know that shifting an entire Tier 1 component ecosystem is not a political choice. It is an economic impossibility on a short-term horizon.
The unspoken terror inside Treasury departments is the loss of the 30-year deflationary anchor. Cheap, highly efficient manufacturing out of Asia didn't just boost corporate profits. It kept Western consumer inflation artificially suppressed for decades. Federal Reserve and European Central Bank internal models confirm a grim reality. Forcing a sudden, unbuffered structural break would instantly detonate domestic price stability, permanently locking Western economies into a high-inflation, low-growth trap. This is why the standoff remains frozen. Political leaders are trapped by the very rhetoric they invented
for domestic electoral consumption. They promised total economic independence to voters who demand security. Yet, their own financial advisors hand them data, proving that complete autonomy requires a decade of severe domestic austerity and economic contraction. You cannot campaign on a platform of deliberate national belt-tightening. Consequently, statecraft has devolved into management of decay rather than resolution of conflict. Major powers continue to posture with tariffs and export controls, hoping to buy time, while quietly praying that technological automation or miraculous domestic reshoring will somehow bridge the impossible gap before the system buckles under its own internal stress.
But time is the one luxury this architectural trap does not provide. When an economy is built entirely on the fragile premise of absolute efficiency without redundancy, every delayed year compounds the eventual cost of the break. The architecture will not bend forever. It will snap. And when it does, the illusion of control will shatter right along with it. But if the architecture of global trade is destined to fracture under its own mathematical gravity, what happens to the rest of the world, caught directly in the shockwave when the two superpowers finally collide?
When the architectural trap finally fractures, the shockwave will not stay contained within Washington or Beijing. Global middle powers, from Southeast Asia to Latin America, face a brutal reality check. For decades, they thrived by hedging between superpowers, treating the global trade network as a permanent, frictionless highway. When that highway splits down the middle, strategic ambiguity ceases to be an option. Nations will be forced to choose whose currency, whose technology standards, and whose financial rails they will sink or swim with. This is why the post-architectural world will be defined not by open globalization, but by defensive regionalization and sovereign currency diversification. Nations are quietly stockpiling hard assets, building redundant local supply corridors, and drafting bilateral trade agreements that bypass traditional Western financial clearinghouses entirely. They aren't preparing for a temporary market correction. They are fortifying their borders against a permanent systemic breakup. The illusion that any single nation can permanently outsource its industrial foundation while retaining sovereign independence is officially dead. The architects of modern globalization assumed that capital could flow infinitely without political friction, ignoring the basic law of economic gravity. Sooner or later, the physical cost of dependence catches up to the balance sheet. For corporate boardrooms and policymakers alike, the lesson is ruthless. Efficiency without autonomy is just a slow-motion form of surrender. Those who mistake the current stability of the machine for permanent safety are ignoring the hairline fractures running right through the foundation of global power. The architecture of confinement has reached its limit. The question is no longer whether the system will break, but whether nations will have the courage to build something sustainable from the rubble before the collapse chooses for them.